Welcome back everyone, it's Photography Lounge with another video on audio stuff rather than video stuff, and coffee in a blue cup. Now, today I'm going to say a few words about a favorite format of mine, and that's called Minidisc. The reason I want to say these words is because there's a lot of narrative built around the system. That narrative generally tended to be that it was as good or better than CD. Then later on, as people understood that's kind of a ludicrous claim, they claimed that it was better than Minidisc. Oh, sorry, it was better than MP3, iPod and that sort of ilk. But the truth was somewhere in the middle. And it wasn't easy to discover, and no one really uncovered that, and still haven't really uncovered it except for in the deep web of hydrogen audio, Reddit and other places where people actually discuss serious things when it comes to audio. I will explain my history. My history is that I got into Minidisc around 1999. I first purchased a Sharp Minidisc recorder. It broke several days later. I replaced it with a Sony MZ-R37, which looked like it was straight out of the 1970s. Beautiful design. And later on I had Panasonic, Sony, Kenwood. I never got into the JVC or the Victor stuff, but I stayed particularly long on Sharp. And the basic narrative in the Minidisc world, still today, and Minidisc has been discontinued essentially from 2006, I think, is that Sharp had the best sound. And why did it have the best sound? It's because it had the AUV 24-bit, no, sorry, not 24-bit, 1-bit DAC. And the 1-bit DAC essentially, well, the 1-bit technology essentially comes from Super Audio CD in the way that it's someone else with a better engineering background can explain it to you. But it's a lot of whiffle, essentially, about audio quality, this and that. I'll explain it a little bit later on with a better narrative, something that I've actually written out rather than trying to cast off the top of my brain. But let's take a look at a couple of these units, starting with the largest one. And actually my favorite recorder of all time, at least portable recorder. I have a much nicer deck upstairs that sounds fantabulous, and I mean that both from a theoretical perspective as well as from an ear perspective. Now, this is my favorite portable recorder. It's called an MZ-B100. It has stereo microphone input. It uses a battery, an AAA size battery, so you can go to the shop and you can pick up a battery if your battery runs out. But the battery is pretty good. It lasts around 25 hours, something like 14 or 15 for recording. And one touch eject. One touch eject. One touch eject. Yeah, like that. Has a speaker here as well. So if you want to listen to your sound, your really well recorded mini discs in a horrible centrally located speaker that's tinny as hell, here it is. But it's well made. You can crunch it. There's very little flex in the body. The plastic pieces in the middle come together extremely well. It is a beautiful product. But the Minidisc recorder that really got my eye, back when I essentially settled for the MZ-R37, was this Iowa unit. This is called the AMF-70. Has a backlit LCD on the front, a pretty nice remote control, which isn't shown here, and a hell of a lot of bass with some damn good DSP settings and EQ settings. Beautiful player. Look at that logo, MD. It's like something out of the early 80s, thinking it's the 2000s. Beautiful. This player has a big problem, and that is that its battery is a horrible lithium-ion design that no one supports, and I've not seen a single player where the battery still works. So you have to use an external battery pack. The external battery pack doesn't clip on as it does with a lot of these players. You have to use a cable and sort of duct tape it all together. But it's a beautiful thing. My favorite player. Well, let me explain before I got that. Before I before I got really heavily into players, I got into the marketing behind Minidisc. And the marketing behind Minidisc was just all over the place. As good as CAD, as good as DAT, better than MP3. And then in the early 2000s, there came these digital high definition amplifiers, or maybe they were first digital amplifiers, and then it was high definition amplifiers. And one of the ones that really touted it was this Kenwood DMC S55. It's a beautiful looking player, extremely light, probably made out of some sort of thin pressed aluminium, but it's horribly made. Check this out. You can pinch it and the body flexes. The buttons are cheap. The plastic, at least, is lined up on the sides, but it feels cheap. And well, even back in the day, even with the supplied headphones, what I noticed was there's so much background noise and hiss coming out of this thing, I thought it was defective. Well, I tried several other players. That's how the Kenwoods sound. Horrible. The ones that really nailed their marketing were Sharp. Sharp brought out the DS8, which I believe was the first portable marketed with a 1-bit digital amplifier. And this 1-bit caught the MD world by storm. This was it. It sounded so much better than the Sony players. And it has a nice little light. Here, let me show you. Wait, no. Play. Wait. Let's pop in a disc. See that nice flashing light? Beautiful. Anyway, the design is rather understated. It's got nice button layout here. Good charging controls here. Understated design. It's got a little bit of a lip on the front. It's a beautiful design. But on the test bench, let me tell you, well, before that, it's got a whole bunch of Dolby headphone settings, got pretty decent X-bass, very low noise floor, so you can put in sensitive earphones from today, even like a Campfire Andromeda, and get very little hiss from it. In fact, some of these Sharps will have as little hiss as something like, what is it? The Aston Kern $3,500 player, AK380. Very little hiss. That's going in its favor. But you put it on a test bench and you put through a 24-bit file or a 16-bit file that's rendered against actual standards, and you'll see this thing is horrible. Even without headphones in, it's got something like 1% harmonic or 2% harmonic distortion. You put in, sorry, 0.1 or 0.2, which is high actually, considering that the test file has like 0.003 or 004 or something like that. It's ridiculous. You plug in a pair of headphones and you've basically sunk the ship, because the amplifier can't sustain current very well. So you get drops out in bass and you get little poke ups in the treble, etc. Worst of all, the stereo image on this bloody thing is minus 23 decibels. Minus 23 decibels, my friends, is practically, as far as I'm concerned, monorail. So you're getting so much channel bleed from one side to the other that, I don't know, it's supposed to be like 24-bit audio or whatever, but it's probably something like 2-bit or 3-bit. This is horrible. So just bad. And that goes for second generation AUV portables. This is the, what is this one called? DS70S, another beautiful player, very similar design as the DS8. And it's the second generation, as well as I've got a third generation. It was called the DP700. And the DP700 was horrible in every aspect. It tested similarly, but in between tracks there's a lot of background noise, and inside mechanical noise you get going that goes straight through the earphones. These are horrible sounding players. Back in the day, earphones were not so sensitive and it was not such an issue. But today, this is a huge issue because all of that comes through, even through earphones like these, the EX1000 from Sony, which are not terribly sensitive. But MD was better. MD was better than iPod. MD was better than iRiver. MD was better than everyone. Its sound was phenomenal, so airy, and the treble was just so nuanced. Except that when we test it, it's all crap. Even my favorite sounding non-Sony player, which is the Panasonic, I always forget the name of this bloody thing, SJM117. It's a beautiful player. It's got like this like checker pattern on the front, easy to use controls which are the size of your front finger. The battery goes in easily. It's made far better than the Sharps. I'll show you later. But even this one doesn't test very well. You're looking at like 86 decibels or 88 decibels of dynamic range, and that's probably a bump up. I don't think RMAA is actually that accurate. It's probably giving an extra 6 or 7 decibels to anything I test. So these are not anywhere close to 16-bit quality. The best one I've ever tested is the Sony NH3D. This is a downloader. It's a high MD unit. It technically records, but you can't put line inputs or optical inputs to it. All that you can get is by connecting it to USB on your computer, you can get the music from Sonic Stage into this thing. It's a rather staid designed unit. It's got some pretty horrible to use controls on the side where you push in a little jog stick to hit play and pause, and on the same control you also adjust volume, but it's made extremely well. Battery life is good. Noise floor is a little bit higher than the Sharps, lower than the Kenwood, lower than the Aiwa, lower than the Sony BZ100 or MZ-B100, sorry. But it's higher certainly than a modern MP3 player. In fact, it's higher than a lot of MP3 players from the day. All of that is to say that I have been in the MD world for a long time, 1999. I have loved MD. I still love it, but I've grown up. It is no longer possible, or at least honest, to say that MD sounds better, or unless I define sound better by my preferences. And I do love the sound of this Panasonic. I love the sound of this Panasonic. Even though it doesn't test that well, in fact, distortion's off the charts in some areas. That's why I tend to say that distortion doesn't always matter. If it's a huge amount of jitter or IMD that goes in the sound or in the different phases, it's horrible sound. But when it doesn't do that and it just gives you something that you can adapt to and that you can consider good for yourself, then it sounds good. But on a test bench, none of these come close to an unloaded iPod from 2005. Now this is the one that I think Apple faithful were like, yeah, it's a pretty good sounding one, and a lot of people look back and they think of the iPod video as one of the best sounding iPods. It had a horrible amplifier for headphones where you plug in any headphone that's not like a 300 ohm or anything over 80 ohms, and then you would see large voltage drops at different current levels all the time. So an earphone like this wouldn't only pick up a lot of hiss. This has a lot of hiss, and it's not a smooth hiss. It's granular, where it kind of goes up and down, and you can, I don't know what it is, some sort of problem with how the battery is connected. I don't know, but that was bad. But the signal quality itself, as long as you could get beyond the hiss and the mechanical noise, was very good. One thing that really bothers me looking back is that Minidisc faithful really took to the marketing of Minidisc, and then they ran with it. So the marketing behind the Sharps was pretty nasty, claiming that this was really, really good sound, when in fact, testably, it's pretty horrible sound. And if you liked it, well, that's really up to a couple of questions. Did you like it because the marketing said that it sounded better, or did you like it because you actually liked it? I never got really into the Sharp sound, although I did like its bass. I never had a problem with the Sony sound, and the Sony sounds, of all of them I've tested, even this recorder, which is not marketed for best sound, ends up testing better than every one of these other ones, except for maybe the Panasonic. So what was it? What was it about Minidisc that really made it stick out? In my mind, and looking back, it's the fact that Minidisc restricted you to a certain, well, finite number of discs you could take with you. If you had a big man bag, you could put 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 in there. If you didn't have a man bag, you were stuck with something like, well, 3. You could even put them in your wallet, you could put them in your pocket. They wouldn't easily get damaged. But you had to think, before you left your house, what music do I want to take with me today? Do I want to take 3 albums? Do I want to take 5? Do I want to take 10? Do I want to make sure that I can cover the highs and the lows of my own emotional climbs and divots? Or do I want to put some music that kind of lifts me up or drags me down, completely unrelated to my emotion. You would think about my summer music, you would think about winter music, you would think before you brought your music with you. When the iPod came along and other MP3 players that allowed you to put a whole bunch of music inside of a single device, you no longer had to think about, as much at least, about the music you want to take with you. It was always there. Convenience is a wonderful thing, but when convenience essentially trumps that part of your mind which thinks about what it must do before it steps out of the house, I think you kind of lose something. And I have not any right now, but I used to love printing out labels for these mini discs. And I love the fact that I dropped it. Drop it and it wouldn't easily get damaged. You might get dust in here from time to time, but mini discs are rather robust. And they're cute. They look like a tiny little CD, which probably is what they are. There was something special about taking a minor or miniature album with you and just enjoying it. Not worrying that it would get scratched. And if it did scratch, you could replace it for $1. Of course, you could buy albums on Minidisc, and I did. I bought Bridge Over Troubled Waters. That was the only one I ever bought. It was not cheap. They were never cheap. And of course, the recording quality may have been as good as anything, but the encoding quality of a Minidisc was, of course, worse than CD. So there's a whole bunch of problems. But in general, Minidisc essentially limiting you to a few albums, as well as you could never get a device really smaller than this. Today's MP3 players, of course, iPod Shuffle was one of the first tiny, tiny, tiny ones. iPod Nano, of course, all of those. You could fit several of them, even in the smallest of the mini disc bodies ever made. And even the iPod Video, 30 gigabyte, is not much larger, nor is it really heavier than one of these tiny mini disc players. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's convenience of the MP3 format and players that won out in the end. And it was, I think, there was a whole bunch of marketing fails within Minidisc that made it a hard system to push forward in the future, as well as expense. Of course, once you got a high Minidisc, the discs were like $30 a pop, maybe, yeah, around $30 a pop, and today they're more because they're rare, and people that are using them, like myself, are just collectors. But Minidisc still has a special place in my heart, and I'm trying to pare down. I've been trying to pare down for years. I'm probably going to sell, here, let me do this. I'm probably going to keep just the Panasonic. My recorder deck upstairs is the Sony MZ-R37. Beautiful, beautiful recorder. On the same, by the way, on the same hardware test, it basically aces all the 16-bit audio, as good as a WAV file, almost. So it's proof that it's not the Minidisc recording that's the problem, it's the hardware. The hardware is, in general, crap, no matter what they say about it. Anyway, no thank you for Sharp OV. Horrible sound quality. Put it over here, except for his. No thank you, Sharp. You're beautiful, but no thank you. Another Sharp. No thank you. This is the DS504. It's a second generation also. No thank you. The Sony. I will actually probably replace this downloader with EH930, which is just a player, also high MD. Sony, if you're going to go into Minidisc, Sony is the best one. They test the best, they're made the best, and they last the longest. Sharps, of the Sharps I've had, around half of them have died. Never had a Sony that's died, but of course they can. This Kenwood is a piece of scheisse. It's so much hiss, so much background noise. It's as bad. It's just, there's nothing to recommend it except for maybe battery life. Horrible. The Aiwa, my first love in Minidisc. If only it was less noisy on the input and had better batteries, I would keep this and no other. Beautiful, it just screams all the beauty of Minidisc and all the problems. It's just, oh, I love it. Look at that. You can like squirrel it. I love that. Yeah. What I'm recording this this podcast or video on is actually what's replaced this for me, which is a Sony PCM D50, something like that. I think it's from 2008. It's a PCM recorder, higher quality, of course. You can just upload your files to your computer and they're better. You can do 2496 recordings. Yeah. So I am going to be left with this Panasonic, as well as my Rockbox iPod, and of course my iPhone. These are what I love. I know that the Panasonic technically doesn't test as well. It has some other problems, but it just looks so damn good and it's fun to use. And that is my Minidisc introduction. I'll do another video showing all my claims, because I would hate to just say Minidisc sounds bad or Minidisc hardware sounds bad and just leave you with that. It does sound bad, it tests bad, and the narrative was completely broken from the start, and I will back up my claims. But until then, you just gotta know that this camera and audio and some other geek loves Minidisc whilst realizing it is a failed and fraught format. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you'll leave a comment, subscribe if you want, and yes, I promise you that the SL versus XH1 video is on the way. This weekend I'll be shooting an autofocus performance comparison between the two with my daughter and my wife, like my wife pushing her in a little buggy cart and running toward me and showing you exactly how the SL just completely fails to focus in autofocus tracking situations and then blows away the XH1 in single point. Spoiler alert. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.